stream, and I can see that already Himsis are beautiful is here. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? So today we are doing a live stream to celebrate me getting 300 subscribers. And I've been doing this channel now for close to 3 years now. And I've grown a lot this past year. So we started out 2022 with less than 100 subscribers. By the end of it, we were almost... I'm glad to see you too, Hymns Are Beautiful. By the end of 2022, we almost got to 300 subscribers, and now in February, we got to 300 subscribers, which is amazing. So I want to thank you all readers who have subscribed and who have watched this channel. And to celebrate this getting 300 subscribers, I thought doing a live stream about this. And I'm gonna do a couple things. So the two main things I'm gonna talk about. Hello, Williams Library, greetings. So the first thing I'm gonna do is a January wrap up. So I've read currently I've read 5 books this year so far. So 3 in January and 2 in February. So I'm gonna talk about those books briefly. And I'm also gonna talk about my favorite books from different genres, and there are probably a dozen different genres I'm gonna talk about here. Hello, Dad. So yeah, and again, thank you for 300 subscribers. Before I start, by the way, Williams Library, you mentioned the last live stream, you asked me whether I had watched an alternate history show, 1983, and I actually watched that in the last month. So I've watched that season, and that series was okay. There were some slow parts, but there were some characters I liked. I liked the cop in that series. So if you want Polish alternative history, that's something you can check out, 1983. It's on Netflix. So we can get started with the January wrap-up. Yeah, thanks, Williams Library. So let's get started with the January wrap-up that kind of goes into February. So the first book I completed this in January. By the way, by the end of 2022, I've read 60 books, so I read a couple of books after the live stream, or 2-3 books. But the first book I read in January was Fall of Giants, which I had begun reading a little before Christmas. That's a big Ken Follett book, over 900 pages, and that's the first novel in the Century trilogy, which takes place during the 20th century. And that book takes place mostly during World War I, although it starts out during 1911 or 1910, I think, and it goes up to 1923 or so, I think, with the end of the Russian Civil War. Hymns Are Beautiful last November, for example, I owned 2 Turtlelove books. Now I own probably around near 45 and will buy another 8 or so by the next week. That's amazing, Hymns Are Beautiful. So I think I've read about 30 Turtlelove books, maybe 31. And me and my father have a collection together about slightly less than 40 books. So you actually somehow have more Harry Turtlelove books than me, which would be a rare thing in Europe, but it's probably quite common in America. But I'm curious, Hymns Are Beautiful. How many Harry Turtlelove books have you finished reading so far? So Fall of Giants. So yeah, big historical fiction book. My second Ken Follett historical fiction novel. And I preferred the first novel I read by him, The Man from St. Petersburg. That one is a lot more fast-paced, although both heavily go into historical fiction. But Fall of Giants, I had some issues with it. So there was a lot of interesting history around World War I and the Russian Revolution, and the context in Europe right before World War I. So you actually get the first few hundred pages are in the months preceding World War I. and the last couple hundred pages or so, I think, are after World War One. So that's very interesting, the context you learn about. But I had some issues with that novel. So some when I read historical fiction, I read it for the thrills and I read it for the historical aspects. But what Ken Follett does in a lot of his historical fiction, and he has a lot of romance. And when you read a romance scene every 30 pages, that kind of gets boring. So that was one issue I had with this book. But overall, still, it was a good book. It still perpetuates some economic and political myths about that period, World War One. But overall, it's a good historical fiction book. So if you're interested in a World War One epic, then you should check out that book. Hymns Are Beautiful. I've read 2 of his books and nearly done with Joe Steele. Okay. Hymns Are Beautiful. A nearby Christian thrift store sells books at 50 cents or $1. And I found a bunch of Michael Crichton books. I ended up buying 20 books there for like $15. Oh, I did not realize that they still had bookstores where you could buy books for 50 cents or $1. And not $30 or Crichtons. I am starting to collect Robert Harris and have 5 or so of his books and collecting them. Yeah, for Robert Harris, so far for all of his fiction books, me and my father together, we have all of them except a couple. So one of those I've read Imperium. The only book I have by Robert Harris, the only book I don't have by Robert Harris, which I haven't read yet, is Enigma. But all these other novels, me and my father have, apart from Imperium. But yeah, moving on from Fall of Giants. So the next book I finished reading was Monsoon, which is another Robert Kaplan, which is a Robert Kaplan geopolitics book. By the way, with Fall of Giants, that's a big book, part of a trilogy, and since those are very big books, we'll see when I read the sequel. It may be a while because I maybe don't want to be stuck with a 900-page book again. But the other book I read was Monsoon. Hymns Are Beautiful. I also have gained like 10 or 12 Stephen King books. Oh yeah. Yeah, I've counted my Stephen King collection and I'm not sure, it's maybe something like 25 or 30 books or so, I'd guess. And I'm gonna talk about Stephen King later in this stream, by the way. But Monsoon by Robert Kaplan, that's a geopolitics book about the Indian Ocean. And I learned a lot of interesting stuff here. So, for example, I learned a bit about your country, Williams Library, Indonesia. There's a chapter on it. And that book, for example, talks about how Islam in Indonesia is a lot more syncretic and a lot more... Islamic government in Indonesia, as I've understood from that book, is a lot better than Islamic government in the Middle East. So even though Indonesia is 85% Muslim or so, I believe. If I understood correctly in Williams Library, if you've experienced something personally else than this, what I'm saying, you can comment that. But if I've understood correctly, Christians and Buddhists and Hindus, they're treated pretty well in Indonesia, and there aren't that many radical Islamists in Indonesia. So that was one interesting aspect of the book. There were also several chapters on India, so one on Kolkata, one on Gujarat, which actually talks about Prime Minister Narendra Modi back in the day when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat and not leader of India yet. And here he created a lot of good economic growth, so his government was efficient, but also he had a dark past, kind of. There was an equivalent to 9/11 in India, I think in 2002 or 2003, and you had a bunch of riots there. So it started with a terrorist attack where Islamists burned alive, I think, a bunch of Indians, Hindu Indians, in trains, and then the counter response from Hindus were slaughtering hundreds of Muslims and raping thousands of Muslim women, and then tens of thousands of Muslims in Gujarat were made homeless. So yeah, there's a lot of figures like Modi. They have good aspects, and then they have also bad, dark aspects. Let's see, hymns are beautiful. hymns are beautiful. Christianity thrift stores sell books really cheap because the money goes into charities like church food banks and church-run homeless shelters. Also, most Christian churches encourage reading. Oh yeah, that's very nice. I know that Christian churches are very good are quite often good charities. And yeah, something interesting when you read about the Middle Ages is that among the most literate people and the most intellectual and interested in learning during the Middle Ages is the priest class. So all of those universities during the Middle Ages, they're Catholic universities actually. And they're very religious people who go to university back in the day during the Middle Ages. Williams Library, very true. We are treated well, although the 1998 transition to democracy resulted in some religious violence in central Sulawesi. Oh yeah, I did not know that. I know that you had, I think in 98 or 2002, you had your last anti-Chinese riots in Indonesia, but if you care to comment, Williams Library, what against who that violence was perpetrated against and by who in central Sulawesi in 1998, that would be interesting. But yeah, Kaplan speaks very positively of Indonesia in this book, and it's interesting. You learn about countries. I've learned a lot about countries through reading, and you have some countries that are non-Western and that maybe are dictatorships or quite recent democracies that I've grown to appreciate a lot, and Indonesia is one of them. But so Monsoon is definitely a good geopolitics book to read, although there's too much background of although there's too much imperial history in that book. But that book also made me appreciate, for example, the country of Oman, which was ruled for 40 years or so, or 50 years, by someone called Quay Boots. And he's very similar to Lee Kuan Yew in Oman. Which book is too dated? I don't think that Monsoon really would be too dated, because a lot of those things that are said in Monsoon back in 2010 are very true still today. So yeah, about China, that book is dated as the regime when this book was written. In China, the Hu regime was a lot better than the current Xi regime. So for China, that book is kind of dated, but Oman is still a pretty good place. Williams Library can correct me if he wants on this, but I believe that Indonesia is still I believe that Indonesia is still a decent democracy, and you're not sliding really towards dictatorship that much as some other countries. Yeah. Yeah, and when you read that book Monsoon, you learn about good and bad countries. So Pakistan and Bangladesh have a lot of problems, for example, and Robert Kaplan talks about that. And Robert Kaplan also talks about Burma, and that book is kind of optimistic, you could say, about Burma towards the end, that they're on the brink of transitioning to democracy in Burma in that book. But as we know, democracy in Burma only lasted 10 years, and now they're back to the military dictatorship. So optimism about Burma and China is dated probably, but everything else in this book I would say not really dated. Williams Library, there was violence against the Chinese, and Suharto was so overwhelmed he resigned. I was 13 and became a temporary refugee in Singapore. True story. Oh, I didn't know about that. Sorry to hear about that. Oh yeah. But hey, look, another reason to like Singapore. They took in refugees once things were bad in Indonesia. But yeah. Was wait. Yeah. Let's see. Violence against Chinese. Yeah, and Suharto was over one. Wait. Let me ask you, Williams Library. When you became a refugee, does that have to do that you're from a Christian region in Indonesia, or that you're ethnically Chinese, maybe? But let's see, William. What did Hymns Are Beautiful say? Hymns Are Beautiful. The Germans in that book are generally happy for the for the most part. Which book are the Germans happy, are generally happy for the most part? But let's see, with monsoon, is there anything else I want to talk about? Oh yeah, there's a monsoon, of course, is the wind which has allowed trade in the Indian Ocean for centuries, for 1,000 years probably, or so at least, probably thousands of years. So that means that you've had interconnectivity between different countries in the Indian Ocean, so between the Middle East and Indonesia, between India and East Africa. But now let's move on to the third and final book I read in January. Of course, I'm going to talk about some books I read in February later. William Siberia was a Dutch passport holder at the time the Dutch airlifted their citizens out of Jakarta. Oh yeah, that's similar to what a lot of Western governments have done in Vietnam and I think Afghanistan also. Okay. Yeah. And then I'm gonna guess if you had a Dutch passport and the Dutch airlifted you, they then sent you what, to Singapore? But the next book I read in January is 3 Miles Down by Harry Turtledove, which is his most recent book. It was released, I believe, in August of 2021. Hymns Are Beautiful. Germany would never collapse like that because most of the Germans in that book are happy with this. Oh yeah, you're talking about In the Presence of My Enemies. If I'm correct. I'm not sure if the Germans are necessarily quite happy in the presence of my enemies when they were ruled by Nazis. I mean, I've read a history trilogy by Richard Evans, which is about the Third Reich. So one volume on the Weimar Republic, one volume on Nazi Germany when they were at peace during the 30s, and then one volume on Nazi Germany when they were at war during World War II. And you can tell that a lot of Germans, yeah, they don't, they're submissive, sure, but they're not happy really that the German government is restricting their tongue of what they're allowed to say. Also, the Germans who are really Christians don't like what's being done to the mentally ill. And you have a bunch of priests that are being thrown to jail. And something that Richard Evans describes during the persecution of the Jews in Germany is that most Germans during World War II, oh yeah, like humans in general, yeah, hymns are beautiful. But what Richard Evans describes in Third Reich at War is that the Germans during World War II, yeah, most of them realized what was happening to the Jews. But most of them didn't like it. They felt some shame about it. They did not go around and saying, oh, we feel bad for the Jews. And yeah, they did pretend that the Holocaust kind of didn't happen right after World War II. But they were not happy of it. If I by how Richard Evans describes it, you had the minority of Germans, of course, who despised Jews, the Hitler Youth and the army, and the SS and the Nazi members. But most hymns are beautiful. I'm not justifying fascism. I'm just realistic about human nature. Oh yeah, I understand that. I understand. Dictatorships can last a very long time. That's what empires were back in the day, in the Middle Ages and ancient history. They were dictatorships, and sometimes quite brutal. And some dictatorships have lasted a lot longer than democracies. But with my point having to do with Nazi Germany, Richard Evans claims at least that the Germans, when they saw how the Jews were treated and that they had to wear a star, they felt ashamed of it. Most Germans are not, even during World War II, most Germans were uncomfortable with the fact that the Jews are being massacred. Sure, there are a lot of anti-Semites. Hymns are beautiful if you're realistic about the state of the world. Yeah, my view of the state of the world is that you're gonna have a lot of bad things happening for a while, but proportionally that decreases over time. So I can say that the world was a lot worse in the Middle Ages or in ancient history. So yeah, there are bad things happening today, but a large percentage of the world is living under good or decent government. And in the long run, that's gonna increase probably. In the short term, it could decrease temporarily, but in the long run, it will increase. So in Asia, in a lot of Asia, there's decent government now in Indonesia, in India, even in parts of Africa now, kind of, Malaysia, and in Latin America, things have gotten a little better. Maybe they're no longer under dictatorships. And sure, you have some horrible countries nowadays, but now you only have two totalitarian states left, Eritrea and North Korea. During the Cold War or during World War II, you had a lot worse totalitarian states that existed. You had the Nazis, the Soviets, Maoist China, you had Pol Pot, thank God that he's gone. Williams Library, democracy is stable in Indonesia today, although it is far from perfect. You are not allowed to be an open atheist here, but nobody monitors church attendance. Oh yeah, if I've understood correctly, with a lot of Islamist democracy, you're not really... In a lot of Islamic democracies, they don't like atheists, so atheists are still badly treated. But as long as you're part of one religion, it's okay. Hymns are beautiful. I'm not religious, but religious unity is not religious, but religious unity is good for a nation. It brings national pride and created a stronger people. Yeah, religion can be good or bad, it depends. So sometimes religious unity is good, but sometimes that's also bad. And when you have religious diversity, that creates a lot of tensions. But when I read about the Middle Ages, for example, and I read about Catholic Western Europe, yeah, they were united in being all Catholics, most people, but they treated minorities quite badly, the Jews and other groups, pagans. So religious unity is not necessarily that good. And you can see that the hymns are library, just pay lip service. Oh yeah, just paying lip service of having a religious unity can be good. Yeah, it's good that the West is generally Christian, but and you can see that the United States is a better... Yes, lagging Chris. Hello, Wikipedia. Congratulations for your 300 books. Yeah, thank you, Les Lagendris, my father's partner. But yeah, with religious unity, you can see that the USA is far more religious than Europe. And the USA has a better culture, is more developed, is more free, is more prosperous than Europe generally. You don't have religion anymore in Europe. That's gone. You actually have more religious Muslims than religious Christians in most of Western Europe. So yeah. Let's see, are there any other chats I missed? Okay. But yeah, religious, sure. They can be good or it can be bad. Hymns are beautiful. How is schooling going for you? Decently. So currently I've had 4 courses. And I've passed 3 of them. So I passed my research lab, my study of history course, and my ancient history course. I actually failed my first exam in Middle Ages, so I'm gonna be redoing that exam on Tuesday actually. So if you at least get 40% in the subject, you get a chance to redo the exam, and you need to have 55% for the exam. So hopefully I'm gonna pass the Middle Ages exam next Tuesday, because otherwise I'm gonna have to redo it next year in university. Oh yeah, and by the way, I forgot to mention this, but now I just remembered. Guys, I got my driver's license finally. Yes, is tough, but sometimes it can be funny. Yeah, university is tough, but it's often quite fun. I'm learning a lot of interesting things, and I'm really enjoying the early modern history course. I'm learning a lot of interesting history there, and it's quite balanced. I don't feel it's too much one-sided. And I've met some great history professors. They're quite nice and friendly. Hymns are beautiful. My professor didn't care much about test grades as long as you can demonstrate to him that you understood the overall concept. Well, in the Netherlands here, at least at my university, you need to pass courses, and to pass a course, you need average of 55% in the course. Hymns are beautiful. None of my upper level history professors gave us tests. Oh yeah, we have an exam for our. We have exams for half of our courses, and then for the other half we have essays. Massimo Perez, congrats on the driver's license. Now you can bring back more books. Yeah, I'm finally done with the driving license. Yeah, I've taken so many tests, and in early February I finally passed. So I'm done with my driving test, and I realized I've had a lot of stress during the first semester because of the driving license. So yeah, September, October, November, December, January, not that great months because I had to worry about driving license. But now I got it finally, and now I'm genuinely happy every day since I've come back to the Netherlands now. Uh, let's see. Hymns are beautiful. The professors just had us write short papers or did oral exams in class. Oh yeah, yeah. I enjoy writing papers for stuff. That's fun. We did that a lot in gymnasium in Sweden. But for our ancient history and Middle Ages subjects, it's 70% of your stuff of your grade is your exam, and then 30% is an essay. So and together you average that out, and if you have 5.5, you pass the course. And I got a 5.2 in the Middle Ages course, so hopefully I can raise that to a 5.5 on Tuesday. And then for the research lab thing, I had to write a book review, and I had to write an essay, and that essay I wrote on agriculture in Deng Xiaoping's China, and I got a good grade, so that was good. Let's see. William Zaire, great. Now you can be my driver in May when I go to the Netherlands. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh, you're going to the Netherlands in May. Oh yeah, that's nice. I know you went in, I think, October, Williams Library. But I don't have the driving license on me yet. That's still in Sweden. It's gonna be processed. I'm actually only gonna get the physical driver's license in April, and I'm a student here in Netherlands, so I don't have a car either. But I'm gonna have a car when I drive around in Finland when I'm on vacation there, so that's nice. And I'm gonna be driving a bunch probably in my hometown in Finland when I'm there in April for a few weeks. Hymns are beautiful. Last Saturday I got into a major car accident. I'm okay, but I have to get a new car. Oh yeah, yeah, that sucks. But hey, you're in the USA, so if I'm understood correctly, you have a lot of there are a lot of Americans have car accidents, so not that rare. Not sorry to hear that. Massimo Pira, so yeah, party face, yeah, yeah. It was a great feeling when I finally got my driver's license. I was kind of shocked initially, but then I realized what it was, and now the stress is gone. We went to celebrate on in the evening to at a American style restaurant where in Sweden. That was fun, and then we went to see a movie called A Man Called Otto, which is an American remake of a Swedish movie with a grumpy old man starring Tom Hanks, and that was a great movie. That was very funny. So if you want to watch a good comedy, that's probably still at the cinema. Go check out A Man Called Otto. I enjoyed that. See more comments. Yes, Lagging he's right, but test needs to be done for the school reports. I'm a secondary school teacher. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't always like the rules of the school system, but I have to follow them. I have no choice. So with Middle Ages, either I pass the test on Tuesday or I have to redo the course next year, and I don't want to do that. Yes, Lagging thank you. That would be a great challenge. What do you do? Let's see, what do I do? I'm not sure with what. For the next test, at least I'm rereading the course. So that's one thing I have to do. I don't like Middle Ages, but I've been studying that for the past few days when I learned that I have to redo the exam. Because I don't want to do Middle Ages next year. I don't like the Middle Ages. It's a depressing period. It's not fun history for me to learn about. I like modern history more. Hymns are beautiful. I hope you can make your way to here in America. American state agencies love to hire internationals. Yeah, I hope so too. I can make it to America. I really love the USA. I have a lot of things in common with Americans. Oh, I think her question was addressed to him. Oh, no. Okay. All right. Well, him can answer that in the comments then. Yeah, American state agencies love to hire internationals. Yeah. Well, it depends where they would hire me. I would really love to work for the American State Department. I love foreign policy. As you can see, this is a channel where I talk a lot about geopolitics, a lot of geopolitics book reviews. Like most of my watch time is about geopolitics, and hopefully I can get hired by the State Department. So yeah, that would be nice. I know that Peter Sheehan, he actually works for the Defense Department. So yeah, if I could get a job at the Defense Department or the State Department, or heck, maybe I could even work for some trade ministry department or some economic stuff. Since yeah, so yeah, hopefully I can get hired by some American agency someday. But we'll see. I have to have some skills that they're interested in. We'll see what I do once I get my bachelor's in history, but in a couple years when they have the exchange program in the third year of my bachelor, then I'm gonna hopefully be able to go in exchange to the USA. I know I've heard that my university and UCLA are not the OSCE in Vienna. Yeah, it could be fun to work for some agency like the UN or the OCE. But however, these international agencies, they also believe in a bunch of concepts that are very anti-liberal. So yeah, when you read about the opinions of the OCE on schooling, and then you see which kind of things they like, and they try to want to coordinate the economies in a way that doesn't make sense. So I would probably not want to work too much for the OSCE in Vienna. Yeah, it would be a fun job temporarily, but I would probably go nuts working for a international agency in the like the UN or the OEC. Maybe I could work for something like the World Trade Organizations. That could be something for me, or NATO, or the European Union, where my services or my point of views would actually be taken into consideration. Let's see more comments. So, but yeah, in conclusion, yeah, I want to make my way to America eventually. Hymns are beautiful. Another cheap bookstore opened in my small town. That's great. Apparently, the place I visited last time in Alabama, they are also opening a new bookstore. I think another Books a Million. Hymns are beautiful. My history professor was from Germany and got hired in state embassy role, which brought him here to America. Yeah, if I move to the USA, it maybe would be through academia. Like, I get a history degree, and then maybe some American university wants to take me on as a PhD student. That could be possible. So yeah, maybe I would have to be some professor in the USA, but we'll see. I'm still young. I'm not even 20 yet, so I have plenty of time to think about these things. Hymns are beautiful. He had no desires to go back to Germany. Was pretty conservative and would go on about the Merkel chancellorship. Oh yeah, yeah. If I'm from Europe, of course. Finland, France, Belgium, Italy, Sweden. I'm a mix of European stuff. And if I ever get to move to the USA, apart for some vacations, I would not move back to Europe, I think. Apart maybe for Scandinavia, for schooling for children, but yeah, if I ever get the chance to move to the USA, I would want to do it permanently. I can understand all the immigrants who come to America and they never want to really go back to their home place. But Europe is not that bad, but I can understand if you're a German immigrating to the USA, you wanna pretend that you were never German maybe, and not and come to America and be integrated into the American system. And also, if you're an old school German, I can understand why you don't like Germany, because a lot of Western countries after World War II, they really went in the polar opposite direction of the Nazis or Soviets. So now instead of having moral values, they have none of them kind of. There's some very weird stuff that has happened in Europe. Just this week, when we started our classes in early modern history in Research Lab 2, the teachers introduced themselves and they stated their pronouns, so a lot of things have changed in Europe. See, more chat. Hymns are beautiful. He would take students under their wings and would help them find jobs in Europe if they would be interested, if they were interested. Yeah, if there's some American teacher here in Europe, that could be nice if he could help me get to the USA maybe, or if there's some European teacher who could help me set me up with an American teacher. Massimo Piras, my father. Lucky is watching. Avoid saying anything anti-cat. Yeah, I like cats. I prefer dogs, but I like cats. Actually, yesterday when I was taking my evening night walk, there was a black cat, and what's it called? I put myself to his level, and he came to me, and he went against me like this, and I caressed him a bunch, and on my walk he followed me. So I hung out with the cat yesterday evening for maybe 20 minutes or so, and he wasn't a talker like Lucky, but yeah, some cats are very friendly. Dogs are slightly better. Dogs are a little better, but cats are also very nice if you find the right one. Hymns are beautiful. America is mostly safe country. Is a mostly safe country. Most Americans own weapons, which means a land war would never happen. I'd feel safer here than in most of the world. Yeah, I'd feel very safe in America, with the exception of living in some inner city where you don't have the rule of law anymore and where Democrats no longer uphold the rule of law. But yeah, if I go to the USA and I put myself in some small town in or mid-sized town in the American South or Southwest or not Midwest, but mountain or prairie states, yeah, there's a lot of nice and very safe places in the USA. Actually, in the United States, if you take out all of the big cities, you have less murders in the USA than in Europe, proportionately. Let's see. Hymns are beautiful. I get to buy cheap books and relax all the time. Yeah, yeah. One of the best things with the USA is all of the cheap books you can find there. I mean, from now on, since my experience of being in the USA last April, every time I go to North America, I'm going on shopping sprees at cheap bookstores. I can't buy that many books since I have to bring them back across the Atlantic, but yeah, if I can get a dozen books or so each time I go to North America, that's great. And I can get them quite cheaply also. Hopefully I can get some more Thomas Sowell and Harry Turtledove books when I'm there next time. William Cyber, it does not look like there will be a season 2 for 1983. Pity wanted to know if the coup would make social changes or allow the truth of the bombings to come out with the party out of power. Yeah, the ending of 1983 kind of confused me. Hymns are beautiful. Why are books so expensive in Europe? Okay, let's see. So why are books so expensive of Europe? Okay, first of all, probably a lot of them some of them may be imported from the USA. So you have import duties, and now the UK is not even part of the EU anymore, and a lot of books that are printed in English, which is what I read, they're imported from Britain probably, or printed through British publishing presses. So I'm gonna guess you have a bunch of companies who have to pay a bunch of taxes to the European Union for books. Also, there's a smaller market. I'm not sure if there may be a smaller market for English books in Europe than in the USA, so the cost of printing them is higher probably. If often some things I've seen in Europe is that you take a book and the English version of the book is cheaper than the language of the country where you're at, the book is cheaper in that language than in English. So when I was in Sweden, for example, I was in some big chain Swedish bookstore, and I saw the same book by Anthony Beaver about the Russian Civil War and Revolution, and I saw that the Swedish version of the book is a lot cheaper than the English version of the book. Hymns are beautiful. I don't like the European Union. Yeah, I can understand why don't you don't like it. I have mixed feelings about the European Union myself. Although I think it's more positive than negative, but yeah, it has a lot of problems. Hymns are father, my very conservative hymns are beautiful. My very conservative German professor said fascist Germans got their wish and got the Fourth Reich. It resides in Brussels. He would go on about the European Union as a tyranny. Yeah, I like to make fun of the EU as a Fourth Reich. But the Fourth Reich in Europe, the European Union, is much better than the Third Reich or even the Second or the First Reichs. I mean, living under European rule, is fine. They have a lot of dumb regulations, sure, but we're a generally free continent, and there are still decent countries in Europe if you want to be really free. Like, if I really want to own guns, and I like guns, but if I was really desperate enough to be able to carry guns on me, I could move to Czechia or the Baltic states. There, if you get the concealed carry permit, which is short issue, you can carry a gun with you. So not all, a lot of laws that are done in Europe, they're not transnational, they're just national. European hymns are beautiful. Europeans should have their own sovereignty. Well, yeah, that's kind of true. My view of the EU is that okay, it should be a free trade bloc, and that's it. There should not be this currency manipulation. Yeah, you should promote human rights and the rule of law. Massimo Pires, great, William. Thanks. That. The European Union should be about promoting the rule of law and democracy and not mistreating minorities, and especially it should be free trade. That should be the main part of the European Union, but not this thing where Germany starts bothering this and that country. Oh, why don't you allow gay marriage? Or yeah, I'm for gay marriage, but it's not a fundamental issue for the world, I'd say. But the European Union has a bunch of dumb regulations. Now the UK is out of the EU, and the UK has the free trade tradition. So with them gone now, the European Union is gonna shift towards mercantilism, probably in the long run more. And the European Union, this mercantilist culture in different parts of the world has caused a lot of harm. So you have a bunch of trade barriers for importing food out of the away from the European Union, and they give subsidies to European farmers. So now you have a bunch of countries in Latin America and Africa who would be able to develop if they were allowed to sell their food produce to Europe. But now the European Union subsidizes their farmers, so now they're food dumping on Africa and in Latin America. So now a lot of people who wouldn't be poor in Latin America are poor thanks to subsidies to European farmers, and that's partially thanks to the EU. And they haven't been pleasant to Britain since they left the EU. They took that very badly. Hymns are beautiful. I don't like weapons and stuff. My family doesn't. We don't want to own any. But Americans deserve the rights by their constitution. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have American relatives who they don't like guns personally, but they're still conservative, and it's still a fundamental right. And fundamental rights are basically that you don't have to agree with it, but you need to allow it. So there are a lot of behaviors that I find disgusting maybe, but as I'm quite libertarian, I don't want to regulate that. Just leave people alone. Like, taking drugs is a very bad thing for yourself, for smoking or being an alcoholic. Those are bad things, but I don't want to throw people in jail or prosecute them or go after them because they do some immoral behaviors. Hymns are beautiful. Not all Americans are political. My parents hate politics. Yeah, I've heard that. But here's the thing. Here's a belief, and it's kind of controversial. I have. Um, if you're if you're not political, you probably should not vote. Because if you don't really have any understanding of politics, then you may be voting for some guy who is very good at manipulating people, demagogues. I don't view people as stupid who can be easily manipulated by demagogues. But if you don't spend your time thinking a lot about politics and economics and geopolitics, or at least a little bit about it, if you don't have a firm opinion, clear opinion about something, you should probably not vote. So I got to vote in the local elections in Sweden, for example, in August. And before I voted for the party, I did a lot of research to make sure, okay, which party in Europe is the most, in Sweden is the most libertarian. And it's not perfect, but the most economically liberal party in Sweden is Centerpartiet, the center. Hymns are beautiful. Most Americans are becoming libertarian without realizing. Yeah, that's very true. Like I spend some time sometimes watching Republican or conservative media on YouTube from time to time, and they become clearly more libertarian over time. They're more pro legalization of drugs. They don't really care about homosexuals. They don't want to prosecute them, most of them, or treat them badly. They're for gay marriage. It's just that they understand. Okay, government, it causes a lot of problems. Let's see. Were there any other comments, or should I move? Can I move on now to European? Yeah, Williams Library. That's a bit of an exaggeration. Hymns are beautiful. Okay. Yeah, but by the way, this is also an open space, so you can comment whatever you want and debate whatever you want in the comments. Yeah, just we're gonna hopefully we can all keep this civil. It's been good so far. Let's see if that can be sustained. Williams Library, as a libertarian, should all buildings be wheelchair accessible? Market forces might take care of that, but what if the government legislates it so? So I have a very special view on government regulation, for big countries at least. Okay, so for the USA, for example, at the very least, the federal government should not be regulating the economy at all. Leave it up to the states and up to the local governments and up to the counties to have the regulations. Most regulations, I believe, are bad. A few could be justified, so maybe wheelchair accessible is fine. Having some minimal health standards and environmental standards, that's fine, and you can have market incentives also influenced by the government. So would I support wheelchair accessible? Maybe, but still, market forces are good at taking care of things. So a lot of so-called things achieved by government were being achieved anyways by market forces. So, for example, with child labor laws, most children stopped working before they existed in the USA, for example. So, yeah, but I don't, at least federally, I don't want any. I probably wouldn't support a wheelchair regulation on the local or state or county level. I could go one way or the other. I wouldn't mind a regulation on it that much. I would understand if you wouldn't regulate it. So I'm not sure. There are some regulations I wonder. Okay, I'm not sure if we should have them or not. It's just that most regulations in general are bad, especially regulations on trade, and yeah. IMs are beautiful. It should be the choice of the business owner. Yeah, for the mass majority of things, it should be the choice of the business owner. And by the way, a lot of regulations, when you remove the choice of the business owner, you also remove the choice of the workers. So, for example, a minimum wage makes it illegal for a worker to get a job, and that job would only exist if it's paid a small amount of money, and if a $5 job costs at least $10, some people are crowded out of the workplace. So everything is trade-offs, and a lot of trade-offs. Sometimes a lot of trade-offs, the government makes the wrong choice. Hymns are beautiful. Most of our societal woes will be solved by society itself. Yeah, that's probably true. And But the problem is a lot of our societal woes the government does not want to solve at all. They get more power from keeping the problem bad. So a lot of fundamental problems in the United States has to do that children are being raised by only one parent, and but that's incentivized by the U.S. welfare state, and you would have to reform the welfare state radically to get rid or to ameliorate some of society's woes in the United States. So there are radical measures that in a democracy or in any country overall, the government and most people don't want to deal with. So a lot of problems we have, they're solvable theoretically. It's just that the will for of the people doesn't exist for it. Let's see. Okay, so now let's talk about 3 Miles Down by Harry Turtledove. His most recent book released in 2021. And this book is supposedly alternative history about the story of first contact taking place during the Watergate scandal in the 1970s. But the thing is, the first contact where the aliens and the humans meet. Okay, I'm gonna spoil this story a lot, so I'm warning you guys. But this story, you don't get alien and human interaction until the last sentence or paragraph or so. It's a 300 page book, and there's only human contact with aliens at the last page. And you barely see the aliens overall at all. It's a lot of build up of taking this alien spaceship, and you have some interesting Cold War interplay between the Soviets and the Americans. They talk a lot about Nixon and Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger, so that's quite interesting. And about the US and about the Soviet ambassador in Washington. But a lot of the way the story is written is just boring. I like cats, but a lot of this book is just a guy being with his girl, and then the cat interrupting them, thinking he's more important than them. So that book, it's not that well paced, I'd say, and a lot of the scenes are kind of boring. I mean, the characters are fine. It's just it's written in a way that's not that enjoyable to read. So yeah, it's a decent book. Would I really recommend it for a Harry Turtledove book? No, I've read a lot of Harry Turtledove, and I like most of his books. A lot of them I love. 3 Miles Down was not a book I loved. I mean, it's better than Rule Britannia, but still, of all the books you can read by Harry Turtledove, especially about aliens, I would not recommend 3 Miles Down. And there's already an 8 volume series about aliens called World War, the World War series, colonization series, Homeward Bound. Those 8 books are good or great. They're very fun to read, and I like and love these books. And if you wanna read about aliens and Harry Turtledove, you should read the World War series, not 3 Miles Down. See, there were more comments I can see. Hymns are beautiful. I realized a lot of YouTubers or Goodreads or people itself don't really like Turtledove, which is sad, which is why I don't trust most reviewers. Oh yeah. Well, Harry Turtledove can do some quite controversial things in his books. So he's on the left, sure. He's on the American left. But his books are very, very nuanced. So you can he makes you sympathize and empathize with really horrible people. Allows you to see it from their perspective, and he uses a lot of language that some people would find triggering or disgusting. So if you read the Southern Victory series, an amazing series by Harry Turtledove, maybe even better than the World War series, the N-word is dropped a lot, really a lot in that book, because it's Americans in the South after the Civil War, but before the Civil Rights Movement. Of course they hate blacks, and of course they look down upon them, so of course they're gonna call them the N-word. And I'm gonna guess a lot of people who read books don't like Harry Turtledove because of that, because they're sensitive, and they cannot tolerate learning about people who do some disgusting things without demonizing them. Like, I mean, the Southern Victory series is the Confederate States. A large part of that book, that series, is the Confederate States being an analogy to Nazi Germany. And that book even makes you empathize with the concentration guards. And they're really bad people, but you can see how a decent human being evolves to becoming a monster. So you have first a guy. There's a character, for example, in Southern Victory who's called Jefferson Pinkard. And I'm spoiling the series here, by the way, as a warning. He starts out as a worker in the Confederate States. He gets on decently with blacks. He goes into the army. But later after the World War One or the Great War, during the interwar period, he becomes part of the Freedom Party, it's called. It's the equivalent of the Nazis in the Confederate States. And that party hates blacks. And he gets hired as a guard at a prison, and and there are a lot of blacks in the prisons. And then he becomes a camp commandant at the concentration camps, and they're putting in a bunch of blacks and political prisoners. But they're not getting in enough food. And he gets a phone call from a guy who's basically the equivalent to Himmler. And basically, that guy tells him, you want to keep your job, start killing people. So, a lot of us don't understand this, but this is a horrible thing about human nature. But a lot of humans, the vast majority of humans, have a very strong selfish tendency. So, I guarantee you, a large minority of people, maybe most people, would do almost anything to keep their job or to stay economically affluent, do what's best for their family. So if I'm gonna keep my career in good going, and that requires me doing some horrible things that are war crimes, a lot of people would be ready to do it. And this is something you see in the Southern Victory series. And you really feel, and it's fascinating in a horrible way to read about this. There's a character I really like in this Southern Victory series called Scipio. And he's a black guy. He worked as a butler at some plantation. But he's also very well educated, so he's an intellectual. And he's a character that you could look up to. But it ends with him unfortunately dying in a concentration camp. So yeah. That's my rant of why some people don't like Harry Turtledove, probably. Or don't. Oh yeah, it's not even that they lack. I think that a lot of people don't even know that he exists. And a lot of people, when they hear the word alternative history, they think, oh, it's a dog whistle for the far right or something like that. Because, yeah, a lot of alternate history channels, they're kind of right wing. Sure. But most of them, they're not far right. Like, What If Was His is a good alternate history channel, and he has some dumb takes sometimes, but he's right wing. And he's a reasonable guy, generally. Let's see, more comments. Hymns are beautiful. Ironically, many of these people called Turtledove right-wing when the man himself is very, very liberal. Yeah, if you ever go on Twitter and see what Turtledove has to say about Republicans, it's not pleasant. He doesn't like the Republican Party at all. It's just that he writes his books in a way where it doesn't reflect that. So, in recent Stephen King books I've read, I've read Billy Summers, he drops Trump here, and he talks about Trump in a derogatory way, in the kind of, heh, Trump man bad. But Turtledove, when he talks about Trump in Alpha and Omega, he makes a reference to him, but he actually integrates it well into the story. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It makes sense. So Turtledove is an amazing writer. So a book like Alpha and Omega deals with some contemporary politics very well and in a non-antagonistic way. He just presents, okay, this is how people think. You have people from all sides, the religious people. So in Alpha and Omega, you have a religious guy, a priest, and he's nice. He's a good guy, clearly. And you get the perspective of Muslims and Christians and Jews. Perspectives of everyone with Harry Turtledove. And yeah, you may hate some of them when you think about what they've done, but still, Turtledove writes very well. But 3 Miles Down is not a good it's not a good book, no. So that's a exception. But I've only read 2 Harry Trudeau books that I didn't like really. Hymns Are Beautiful. Harry's wife said that Harry told her that he doesn't feel he should have a favorite book that he's written, but his wife said Rule Britannia is her favorite book of his. Yeah, when you read the author's note in Rule Britannia, Harry Trudeau said he had a lot of fun reading Shakespeare and Lope de Vega. So yeah, and it's a lot of people's favorite Harry Trudeau book is Rule Britannia. And I can understand why, if you like history that's not that modern, I can understand that. But it's written in this Shakespearean language of Tao. Imagine reading a page for 500 books, and instead of reading you read Tao. Okay, it's maybe a pet peeve of mine, but I like to read language that doesn't make me tired or yeah. Williams Library. I'm uploading my review of Resurrection Day next week. It's flawed but still an interesting read. Oh yeah, Williams Library. Oh yeah, and by the way, Williams Library. For your, I saw your birthday live stream. I didn't watch it live. I missed it. I was at Costco shopping, but I watched it later. And for some reason, maybe the internet connection didn't go well. So I left a comment there, but then I guess the internet connection screwed up and deleted it. So yeah. So sorry about missing your stream, kind of. But it was still a fun stream to watch post ending it. Williams Library. I'm to the center left, but I love alternate history. Matt Mitrovic of the alternate historian does not talk like a right winger, but I don't know. Oh yeah, well I was thinking about what if he's center right. There are some far right alternate history YouTubers. I think that Monsieur Z, he's far right probably, but I don't really like him. He has some opinions that are not well thought out probably. But yeah, I'm economically you could probably place me as far right. Probably I'm not far right politically in the traditional sense, but economically, if you're a libertarian, you're economically far right. But as you can see, we can have people on the left and the right. Usually we're in the center. Sometimes we're not, and we can enjoy, disagree, and talk about our common interests. Since reading is not a thing that's really right or left wing. It's a thing of educated people. There are some things that politicize things a bit too much. But yeah, it's a nice community we have here. Let's see. Hymns Are Beautiful. His wife answer all our questions about her husband Harry. Hymns Are Beautiful. I'm a theoretical monarchist empiricist. Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of an empiricist in the sense that I really believe deeply in logic and facts and experimentation and reason. And those are the fundamental of things, so you cannot make up stuff. I really despise this thing. We've had this in study of history where people talk about, oh, there's not an objective reality. We just construct things in a sense. No, that's not true. And they always like to talk about, oh, how is this historian discussing this issue? Instead of discussing his own ideas, people focus on the wrong parts in life a lot, unfortunately, today, including at university. Wait, hymns are beautiful. How does Harry Trudeau's wife answer your questions? Do you email her or send mail to her, something like that? How does Harry's wife Laura Franco, so I think she's called, answer your questions? I'm curious about this because if I can get some questions I have about Harry Trudeau through her, that could be interesting. Hymns are beautiful. Intellectuals watch your videos. Yeah, thank you for this. I don't want to sound arrogant here, but I kind of consider myself an intellectual. I mean, I read a lot of history, a lot of geopolitics, and a lot of economics. I think a lot about things. I care about first principles. That's important to me. And I change my opinion throughout the channel, of course, sometimes on different issues. But yeah, I also like fiction, so yeah, we have two parts of this channel, kind of, where we have the geopolitics, Thomas Sowell stuff, non-fiction, and then we have the historical fiction and alternative history. These are two communities. They don't necessarily, they kind of overlap sometimes, but mostly not. But I really like reading a lot of varied books, so it's fun to have people from different communities here. Hymns are beautiful. I just ask it to everyone in the group and she will answer. Generally, I don't personally message her, but she'll answer group questions. Oh, what? So is there? Are you talking about there's some Harry Turtle Facebook group or some fan group or something like that? I'm generally curious about this. Let's see, any more comments? Facebook group. Oh, okay, so Harry Turtle has a Facebook group. I'm gonna check that out for sure. I need to answer that. I asked her in a Facebook group. Okay. Wait, so is that the Harry Turtle Facebook group, or are you in the same Facebook group as her? I'm curious. If you don't mind me commenting what it's called, what is that? What is this Facebook group you're talking about called? Okay, it's run by fans. Hymns are beautiful. Okay. Yeah. So those three books I've talked about. Wait, did I? Race and culture. When did I finish? Oh no, I may have read. Did I miscount how many books I've read this year? Wait, 3, 4. Oh, I miscounted. I've read actually 6 books so far. Harry to the fans. Thank you, hymns are beautiful. Okay. Oh, so I read 4 books actually this month. No, in January. And then I've read another 2 books in February. So the next book I've read was, I actually have it with me here. My books are a little bit all over the place, so I don't have them all on me. But the next, Harry to the fans. Hymns are beautiful. Thank you. That's what it's called. Thank you. Hymns are beautiful. Now this book by Thomas Sowell. This is my 4th book of the year I read. It's a history book by Thomas Sowell. So Thomas Sowell writes economics, but he also writes about history. And yeah, hymns are beautiful. I wouldn't send her a DM. I just asked the group. She seems willing to answer questions. Oh yeah. Wait a second. So I have a feeling we're gonna be here a while. So I can see my phone is to half battery. So just in case, as a precaution here, I'm gonna just start charging it so the stream does not die suddenly. Let's see. Are you charging now? Okay, good. Now we can continue because we're still talking about the wrap up, and I've gone on an hour, so this may be a much longer live stream than I expected. But that's fun. It's fun to hang out with you guys, and we don't do it that often. But yeah. Okay, so Harry Turtledove. No, Thomas Sowell. Race and Culture. This is the 8th book I've read by Thomas Sowell. It's called Race and Culture, a World Review. And basically, it's a history about race and culture and different trends. And this is his first book in the culture trilogy. And it talks about which cultures are good and lead to advancement, which ones do not. And yeah. And there's a chapter, and he has some chapters on there are chapters in here that he later turned into books. So there's migration and culture, conquest and culture, and then he has some topics about race. So he talks about race in relation to economics, politics, intelligence, slavery, and history. And of course, when you read a lot of Thomas Sowell, you read a lot of the ideas he's brought up in here. I've read in Ethnic America, or Black Rednecks and White Liberals, but here he expands on them and discusses them in great detail. And it's very interesting. It's not my favorite Thomas Sowell book, but yeah, this definitely got me interested in reading the culture trilogy. he has some interesting points about slavery. I learned a few interesting things. So wait, if I remember correctly, the Atlantic slave trade, that was 11 million slaves, and then the Arab slave trade, that was 14 million slaves. So yeah, you learn a lot about different interesting facts. And then you have minorities around the world who have created prosperity in their new home countries, and then the local people resent them and try to expel them, and then those countries decline. So in Argentina, the Germans have developed that country a lot. The Chinese have developed the economy a lot in Southeast Asia. The Jews have developed economies around the world, and look how thankful people are to the Jews for creating a lot of prosperity for them. So yeah, people are envious of success. That's one lesson in this book. Because it's easier to blame people who are a minority in your country than look at yourself in the mirror and see, hey, my culture is not as good as the other culture. Yeah, so it's probably a controversial book today, so conservatives would love this and liberals in the USA would hate this, but yeah, it's a good history book. I plan on reading his next books in that trilogy, so Migrations and Cultures and Conquest and Cultures. And actually, my university library has the 2 sequels to this book, so I'm gonna review these books eventually, the second and third one. I'm not sure if I'm gonna review both of them this year, but I hopefully I may be reviewing the sequel to this in June, possibly. See, more comments. Harry wrote another an alien book, standalone. Oh, I did. Oh yeah, called A World of Difference. The Soviets and Americans discover an alien life on a planet, and have different reactions and responses to it. Oh yeah. Hymns Are Beautiful. It's one of his very old books that never got major steam. Hymns Are Beautiful. It was a standalone. Oh yeah. So with Harry Trudeau, I actually went on his bibliography page and counted all his books there. And there are well over 100 books he's actually written. Somehow, it's amazing. He's written more books than Stephen King. And I don't want to read all of his books, probably. I probably don't want to read his fantasy stuff. But there's a lot of more books by Harry Trudeau I want to read. I'm going to read the first volume in the war that came early, actually, this year. And if I like that, I'm going to read the whole series, maybe. Hymns Are Beautiful. I just bought 4 more of his books. That's great. That's great. And but there are a lot of Trudeau books I want to read more. There's probably, I'm gonna say, another 20 or so there is left. In the past 20 minutes. Oh yeah, Hymns Are Beautiful. Oh yeah. Did you buy them on Amazon, or are you shopping during this live stream? Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, there's so much I want to read by Harry Trudeau. I actually checked out the research a bit on his series Cross-Time Traffic, and there's some interesting alternative history there about this United States of America, where the states are at war with each other, or the Germans actually winning World War One. Hymns Are Beautiful online. Oh yeah. Yeah, by the way, there's a geopolitics author called Tim Marshall, and he's releasing another geopolitics book in April. I like this, one of my favorite geopolitics author, and I've pre-ordered it so that so it's not out of stock when it comes out. So I'm gonna get this book sometime in early May. Let's see. My father. Any of you guys know 5 Decembers by James Crystal? I think when you and me talked that sometime, I think you mentioned this book, or maybe no, maybe when I was talking with our American friend in Sweden, he mentioned this book. Maybe it rings a bell, but I don't really know that book. Himself beautiful. Okay, Williams Library. The reason I like World War II alt history is because I often ask myself, while my hometown would not be in the Reich, will we embrace toxic ideas from Europe? Yeah, and also, you have some scenarios that are maybe a bit far-fetched, but if the Germans win World War II, the Japanese maybe also do so, somehow. But let's just say the United States stay out of the war, and then the Germans and the Japanese win World War II, then you would have a brutal Japanese empire in Asia, and you would have a brutal German empire in Europe. And I know that the Japanese were in Asia, in Indonesia, and okay, I know that European imperialism in Asia was bad. I know they did a lot of bad things, but if Japanese imperialism had lasted a lot longer, it would have been way worse in the long run for Malaysia to be run by the Japanese instead of the British. I mean, the Japanese, out of all the Western empires we had, so out of the French and British and Italian and Portuguese empires, the Japanese were much, much worse. I mean, a lot of what the Japanese did is comparable to the Nazis. Japan was way worse than Germany. Hymns are beautiful. Yeah, that's debatable. So the actions of the Japanese, they may be equivalent to the Germans or slightly worse. I mean, the Germans did, I'm not sure who killed more people. However, the thought process of the Nazis was way worse than the Japanese. I mean, the Japanese kind of had some mentality. Okay, we Asians maybe are equal, we're superior than you, but maybe we will grant you freedom eventually. But the Nazi mentality is is worse, at least, than Imperial Japan. The Nazis, without a doubt, they hate Jews. They want to exterminate the Slavs. They probably want to get rid of blacks. And they viewed French people, Italians, and other groups as subservient to them. So for example, you had some conference between Heydrich and some other Germans in Czechia, in Bohemia, and there they said basically we're gonna have to kill half the Czechs. So yeah, I'm gonna say that Nazis are slightly worse than Imperial Japan, and also the Imperial Japan was not as totalitarian. I mean, yeah, Imperial Japan was bad, but if let's say I'm Japan, compare me being a Japanese and me being a German. I think that I may be wrong. I haven't read that much about Asia, but I think I would rather be a Japanese person in Japan than a German in Nazi Germany. In it, because Imperial Japan, I'm not sure how totalitarian they were. They were close to totalitarianism, but Nazi Germany really, really were totalitarianism. I mean, with the exception, I mean, the worst regime, the worst totalitarian state in history is Pol Pot's Cambodia. That's the most brutal and cruel one. But then you have the Germans. And yeah, you could maybe say the Japanese are third, but the Germans are definitely worse than the Japanese. Hymns are beautiful. What are your favorite World War II movies? Let me think. Okay, so I liked Inglourious Basterds. That has some of there are so many good and memorable scenes in that movie by Quentin Tarantino. With the Germans there. Yeah, Inglourious Basterds. That's a good movie. Yeah. And seeing the Germans getting killed in a bunch of different ways, yeah, that was kind of fun. Yeah, so many great scenes in that movie. And then I also really like Downfall. I mean, I may be it's maybe a bit sick, but it's fun in a sick way. Downfall. Hymns are beautiful. It's a mini series. Let's see. Wait. Oh, hymns are beautiful. I'm just about done collecting Cross Time Traffic books. Oh yeah, I may start collecting those books eventually. Hymns are beautiful. It's a mini series. I like the TV movie The Holocaust from the 1970s. Oh yeah. Yeah, there are a bunch of World War II movies I haven't watched yet. And I haven't watched any World War II series like Band of Brothers either. And yeah, but I like to read about alternative history where the Germans win. That's interesting. Let's see. Next book. I mean, if you want to learn more about this book, there's a lot of information here, but I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about with race and culture. So yeah, if you're more interested in that, you could check out this review. But moving on to the next book, which I finished, actually I think on the 1st of February, is the fifth Dark Tower book, Walls of the Kala by Stephen King. So I'm taking my time with reading the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I've read 15 or so Stephen King books. And this is the 5th volume, the only one I've read so far this year, Walls of the Kala. And it's probably my second favorite Dark Tower book so far, behind the third Dark Tower book, The Wastelands, because you get the backstory here of, I'm spoilers again, but you get the backstory of Father Callahan, who was in Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And yeah, it's a very big and long book. But finally, we get to the Dark Tower journey. You don't get a bunch of flashbacks in the Words of the Kala book like you do in Wizard and Glass. So, yeah, I look forward to reading the next Dark Tower books by Stephen King. And there are some very weird meta things in this book, like the name of Stephen King appears in the story. And there are some interesting characters here. You learn more about the villains in this book, kind of. Hymns are beautiful. I prefer the Bunker starring Anthony Hopkins. Oh yeah, I know that Anthony Hopkins has played Hitler. It's not as graphic as Downfall, but I find it's a more accurate account of Hitler's last days. I'm not sure how accurate Downfall is. I've heard it's pretty accurate as a movie. But if you've ever watched the Hitler Rants parodies channels, they're just funny, like Hitler ranting about different things. It's maybe bad humor, but still it's funny. So Downfall for me. It's an unintentional comedy, although it's a dark movie, and it's when you actually watch it without all of the jokes, videos. Yeah, it's a dark movie, but I like that movie. Um, I prefer the Bunker star. Yeah, okay, hymns are beautiful. I also like Inside the Third Reich, a TV movie about Albert Speer. Yeah, there's some weird stuff about Albert Speer. He got punished during Nuremberg, but he didn't get executed like the other Nazis, even though he participated in using Jewish and Slavic slave labor. He was a big guy behind that. But yeah, with the Words of the Kala by Stephen King, that encourages me to go on with the Dark Tower series, because the Dark Tower, it's a decent fantasy series by Stephen King. And I don't really like fantasy, but I like Stephen King fantasy. And Stephen King, because you have some weird stuff and you have guns in here and stuff, swords. And I didn't like that much the first book of the Dark Tower. The second book, it's decent. So there are some elements I really like. There's cocaine and gangsters in that book. There's gangsters also appear in Worlds of the Kala, so that was fun. Then the third book, that's good. It's a good story. And then the fourth book, it's a decent story. My problem with it is it's a flashback of the most, what, 4/5 of the book. It's basically a flashback of Roland being a young guy and having his love being killed. So yeah, but the fifth book I really liked, even though it's a thick book of almost 800 pages. So I have two. I skipped Winds Through the Keyhole. That doesn't count as a Dark Tower book that much for me, but now I only have Song of Susanna and the Dark Tower before I'm done with the Dark Tower journey for Stephen King. Let's see. I always, hymns beautiful. I always have believed that through power politics and with the support of the army and when posing as a moderate, Speer would have to power as a second Führer. Yeah, I know that Speer had some close relations maybe with the army. I mean, I remember that when reading Dominion, towards the end you have a civil war between the SS and the army, and Speer is with the army, and the army wins. So yeah, that's possible. But I'm not sure how Speer would be as a leader, because he's a planner, but he's more like one of Hitler's assistants. He's one of Hitler's engineers, like, or architects, like Martin Bormann. So I'm not sure really how Speer could have, yeah, maybe, but when you learn about the 1944 July coup against the Nazis by the army, they had Albert Speer on the list of potential people working with them, but they had the question mark, so he was not part of the army attempted coup against the Nazis. So they maybe could have used him as a figurehead or maybe as a high-ranking person, but I don't think he would have ever been leader of Germany. You kind of have to be bloodthirsty to be a leader of Nazi Germany. Williams Library, Albert Speer basically admitted he was a monster. I don't think he repented, but he recognized his ideals would never be recognized. Would never be realized, yes. Sorry, William Shakespeare. Yeah, Albert Speer was probably a pragmatist, and he's not stupid. So he understood that, okay, at Nuremberg, really say, I'm sorry for what I did, but I am also gonna try to hide the darker things I did, because you had two people kind of repent during the Nuremberg trial. You had Albert Speer, and then you had what's his name, Hans Frank. But here's the thing: they took Hans Frank's diaries, which show that he's in large part responsible for. He was leader of the central government in Poland under the Nazis, and he's responsible for a lot of the killings there of the Jews and the mistreatment of the Jews. So they hanged him. So, yeah, a lot of complicated intricacies having to do with the Nuremberg trials. Also, an interesting thing to think about. Oh yeah, if you ever watched the Nuremberg movie, by the way, with Alec Baldwin, there are a lot of interesting scenes in that movie. It's a bit slow, but there are some good scenes in that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And now I have one more book to talk about with the wrap up here in February, which I recently finished. This United Nations by Peter Zihan. And let's see. This is the third Peter Zihan book I have read. And the first two books I liked. They were 8 out of 10. This one, it's okay, it's mediocre. My problem with this book is that it's very repetitive. There are not that many new ideas. So, yeah, sure, when you read Thomas Sowell, sometimes the ideas, he's brought them up in other books, but he offers a lot of new content in all of the books you read by Thomas Sowell. In Peter Zihan, a quarter of this book, a third of this book is maybe new ideas. Most of it is just a repetition of the accidental superpower or the absent superpower. Like the chapters on Russia or China or Germany, they're redundant, or Turkey or Iran or Saudi Arabia. He's already talked about this in his previous books. So I like Peter Zihan as a geopolitics author, but also the more I think about his book, the more I think, okay, this is a doomer guy. He's kind of exaggerating. The world is not gonna go all to hell. You're not gonna have war everywhere. You can have some wars here, but yeah, exaggerates things. The EU has some problems, sure, but they're not on the brink of collapse, and you're not gonna have war in Western Europe. The war you have in Europe is with Russia, and that's still limited because the Russians are not dumb. They're not gonna attack NATO. NATO is still gonna be around, I believe, and the conflicts Peter Zihan talks about in this book, they're not that realistic. And he's also clearly almost a geographic determinist, and he's very optimistic about Argentina. But if you know anything about Argentina, you can understand why you would not be optimistic about it. They have some of the worst run governments there in the Western world. I mean, if you look at how, you can say that Chile almost did everything economically right, and then Argentina did almost everything economically wrong. So, yeah. So for geopolitics books, yeah, not that. I would not recommend this United Nations at all. You should read his first two books if you like geopolitics. Absent Superpower, Accidental Superpower, especially Absent Superpower you should read. That one is quasi-realistic and talks about Chile a lot. You have some interesting information about green energy in here, but overall it's not a worthwhile book. And this is not a cheap book to get a hold of. You have to pay, I had to pay 40 euros for this book. And there's almost no new content here, so I'm gonna read the fourth Peter Zihan book later on, probably this year. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to it as much. I'm releasing a book review of this tomorrow, and it's gonna be interesting whether the Peter Zihan fans blow up on me for being much more critical of his third book. So yeah. And by the way, I've looked for it, but there was a Peter Zihan book I planned to review this year and read on the geopolitics of the Caucasus called, what's it called? A Crucible of Nations. But I've searched on Amazon. I have not found a single place where it's still in print. So there's one book I had on my TBR for this year that I probably won't be able to follow at all, because it's basically impossible to get a copy of it. The Crucible of Nations by Peter Zian, Lauren Goodrich, and George Friedman. But I have some other geopolitics book I'm gonna read this year. I've got recently, so that's fine. So yeah, and those are books that I've read so far. Currently, I've started reading a book on the history of Åland, my home place in Finland, which talks about how they were in fact kind of occupied, even though they're supposed to be demilitarized 150 years back. And I've read half of it so far, maybe a little more than half of it, and it's, yeah, I'm learning about military history about my homeland. And I've also started reading the first few I've read the first few chapters of the Yiddish Policeman's Unit of Michael Chabon. So yeah, you can expect a book review of this book sometime this month, towards the end of the month. Oh yeah, and by the way, Williams Library, you asked earlier about me doing any more book tags, and I'm actually going to do another book. I'm gonna do a book tag this month, and it's gonna be about alternative history. So yeah, you can look forward to that. Let's see more comments. Williams Library, 40 euros. The Agatha Christie novel, new book I bought in Amsterdam was only 12 euros. Yeah, well, what sucks with Peter Zian and what sucks with some books, they're not that mainstream. So of course they don't even exist as paperbacks. You have to get them as hardcovers. So yeah, this I think I paid a bit, maybe 30 euros for, but the Absent Superpower, I paid 40 euros for that, because you also have to pay for shipping. I mean, shipping on Amazon Swedish, that's in Amazon's, for shipping on Amazon in Sweden is free, but shipping is not free here in the Netherlands. So yeah, I'm spending a lot of money on these Peter Zian books. I mean, he's the most, my most popular videos are the book reviews of his books, so it's fine, but still, and I paid 30 euros for a book I didn't really like. I mean, too bad. But I have to buy them since I want to read these books, and you cannot find them at any library. You can maybe find them in the United States, but I'm in Europe, and I'm not reading an ebook of this. So that's not worth. It's not worth paying a smaller price to have my eyes burned from looking at the screen. I have to read enough things for school, for university on the computer. I don't want to read ebooks either. Okay, let's see more comments. No, there are no more comments. Okay, so let's see. So I've already been going for 1 hour and 32 minutes. So I'm just curious. I've still got some stuff to talk about here. Favorite books from the different genres. I've made a list of this, where I talk about books from favorite genres, and we've already been going for 1 hour. So do you guys want me to share with you that list, go on with the live stream, or are you getting tired and you want to close it out? I mean, I can talk about it, but we may be here another while then. Oh yeah, and by the way, with so you can comment if you want. We go on the live stream and the list here of favorite books from different genres. But Thomas Sol, by the way, he's releasing a new book. Yes, please continue. Massimo, yes, thanks. Hymns are beautiful. Keep going. JC list. Oh yeah, okay, good. Okay, I'm gonna continue. Oh, and JC, I saw you. I think you're a recent subscriber, so welcome to the Avid Reader YouTube channel. Nice to have another person in the live stream. But Thomas Sowell, he's releasing another book. So what? He's born in 1930 or 1931. So what is he now? Or 1929? 93 or something like that. And he hasn't published a book since 2020. Williams Library, keep going, but don't do too much of a deep dive. Okay, yeah. Do you think I've done a deep dive so far in the live stream? Maybe I get carried away. JC, I am famous, ma. Oh yeah, nice, yeah. Now we're all famous because we're on YouTube and we have videos here. And so now I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but all of these YouTube things, if these sources are kept in digitized online, these are future sources for future generations 100 years ago. So when you're gonna look at culture, when they're gonna write a history of book culture in 100 years, they're gonna go to BookTube and look at some of the channels. So who knows? Maybe this live stream will be brought up in some future live stream, in some future book. Or maybe I'm just fantasizing about weird stuff. But Thomas Sowell, he's releasing a new book in June called Social Justice Fallacies. So yeah, I'm not sure. If anyone likes Thomas Sowell, you can say if you would be interested in a book review on this social justice fallacies. I'm not sure if I would like to read that book, since yeah, reading about social justice is kind of boring. I want to read more about economics and history. But now moving on to my favorite books from different genres. So let's see. So I've gotten let's start of course with alternate history. And I don't have these books with me during Belgium or Sweden, by the way, but with alternate history, my favorite alternate history book I would say is Lest Darkness Fall by L. Sprague de Camp. The book that got Harry Turtledove into writing, and this book is about right after 100 years after the fall of the Roman Empire. You have some guy who's in fascist Italy, and he gets sent back in time to the Ostrogoths in Italy in the 500s or 600s. This is during the time of Emperor Justinian's of the East Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, and here they're changing history in this book to prevent the Dark Ages. And the Goths in this book are presented as liberal despots. So yeah, the Dark Ages apparently in this book are kind of prevented, and it's a very fascinating read. It's a short read of a couple hundred pages. Oh yeah, I forgot. My father wanted me to bring it back from Sweden, so I actually have a copy here of it. Lest Darkness Falls. And yeah, it's an amazing read. If you really want to read alternative history and want to read something weird, very different from modern alternative history, you should check out this Lest Darkness Falls. And there's, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, next genre is dystopia. I haven't read that many dystopias. I've read a lot of alternate history, but not dystopias. So with dystopias, my favorite dystopian book is 1984 by George Orwell, one of my favorite books overall. It's the perfect description of what totalitarianism is. Like if you want to understand how it is to live the life of a North Korean kind of, or how it was like to live in Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union kind of, then you should read 1984. You really understand totalitarianism. This is really the extreme extent if you take, this is what totalitarianism is and collectivism is if you take it to its logical extreme. And it's a amazing dystopia. I mean, it's the perfect blueprint to understand totalitarianism. So yeah, and I like George Orwell anyways. I mean, I have books reviews about him on this channel. Okay, and then we have economics, and with economics, I've read mostly Thomas Sowell, but I've read also some Austrian economics. And my favorite economics book is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And I actually read this book from I read this book through my economics teacher in high school. So during the summer, a couple years back, he lent it to me, and it's a amazing book on economics. It's a perfect introduction. I mean, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell is a good economics book, but Economics in One Lesson it's the perfect economics book. And here you have the one lesson. The Economics in One Lesson is basically that when you have an economic policy by the government, you only see the short-term positive effect often, but you don't notice necessarily the long-term negative effect. So that's what the glass window fallacy is. You break a window, okay, so now you have a job for a glass maker. But now the long-term negative effect of that, for example, is that now the labor of someone which would have gone into something more productive is going to fixing up a window. So Economics in One Lesson, if you're interested in economics, I really recommend you to read that book first. Moving on with fantasy, I haven't read a lot of fantasy, mostly the Dark Tower stuff. But my favorite fantasy book is probably Insomnia by by Stephen King, and this is a fantasy book that has a lot of Dark Tower connections. So ironically, my favorite Dark Tower book so far is a book that's not even really that's not even called the Dark Tower, and this is a story about an old guy. His wife is dead, I think, and he's starting up a relationship with another old lady. This is happening, by the way, in Derry, Maine, so you have connections to it and other Stephen King stories. And you also have things that they talk about abortion here, and there's a wife beater in this story, and it's a great Stephen King story. And you have a lot of interesting Dark Tower connections in Insomnia. So yeah. Then for geopolitics or global politics or international relations, whatever you want to call this genre, you have Asia's Cauldron, Williams Library. Have you read The Long Walk? No, I haven't read The Long Walk by Stephen King. When I was in a used bookstore in Alabama, I saw The Long Walk, but I thought I've already got plenty of Stephen King books so far, so I haven't read that. But actually want to read that maybe sometime, The Long Walk, but it's gonna take a few years because there are a lot of other Stephen King books I want to read first before I read The Long Walk. But my favorite geopolitics book is Asia's Cauldron by Robert Kaplan. I've already talked about this book and this author a bunch of times. And this is a great geopolitics book, an introduction to the South China Sea. If you want to understand East Asia, the different governments there. If you want to understand why Malaysia and Indonesia, no, not Indonesia, why Malaysia, Taiwan, Philippines, and Singapore are the way they are today, it's a good book. It also stresses the importance of it also stresses the importance of the presence of the American Navy, creating an anti-Chinese coalition with Vietnam and the Philippines against China in this book, and Taiwan. And it's a great geopolitics book, and it also talks about some interesting strongmen that Robert Kaplan argues were good for the country in the long run. So Chiang Kai-shek was good for the long run of Taiwan, you could say. Same thing with Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, and to a certain extent, same thing with Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia. Although with the guy in Malaysia, I'm not sure about that, since his anti-Chinese policies, you cannot justify them morally or economically or politically in any way, shape or form. But yeah, and I like Robert Kaplan generally. Although I've only read 3 of his books. Then moving on, we have historical fiction, and for historical fiction, I've mostly read Robert Harris so far. And out of all Robert Harris books, out of all historical fictions book I've read so far, I would probably say that my favorite historical fiction book is Act of Oblivion. The most recent Robert Harris book, I think, released in August or September 2022. And this takes place in the restored monarchy of Britain and in colonial America during the 1660s and 1670s, with some flashbacks to the 1650s and 1640s, I think. And it's basically the British government trying to capture and execute the guys who executed the British monarch, I think Charles I was it, in the late 1640s. And it's a amazing historical fiction story. You learn a lot about the culture and the religiosity of colonial America. You get both perspectives of the English Civil War, of Parliament under Cromwell, and then the British monarchy under, I think, the Charles, or whatever they call it. I don't remember really what the King of England is called during this time. But yeah, amazing historical fiction. So, although some people may not like the religiosity in that book, which I can understand. Then for history, moving on to history, and for picking a favorite history book, it's hard since I've read so much history, almost 50 history books now. But I would have to go with Ethnic America by Thomas Sowell. You see, most things with history books, and they're interesting and they're good and decent books, but they have a lot of economic fallacies. They make a lot of assumptions about economics that are wrong. But of course, Thomas Sowell doesn't usually do that, so my favorite history book is Ethnic America by Thomas Sowell, and that book is about the story of American immigration. So about the Japanese, the Chinese, the Italians, the Jews, the Germans, and the Irish, and you learn a lot of history about these people. And it's not really a political book by Thomas Sowell like his other economics or history stuff. It's a lot more objective, a little bit like a conflict of visions. But yeah, it's a great history book and about that. So if you want to learn about the history of immigrants in America, you should check out Ethnic America by Thomas Sowell. Even if you don't agree with his economics, it's still a good, interesting history book. By the way, I also read a biography by him. That's the last thing I read last year. Finished reading. I read Maverick by Jason Riley, a Thomas Sowell book. No, a Thomas Sowell biography. That was if you want to have a biography of Thomas Sowell, read Maverick by Jason Ripley or what's it called. Williams Library. Joel Swagman, another booktuber, loves reading ancient Greek history. Oh yeah, yeah, Joel Swagman. That name sounds familiar for some reason. Yeah, I mean, it was fun learning about ancient Greek history during the. It was interesting for the most part to learn about ancient Greece during the ancient history course in my history bachelor. So I enjoyed that kind of. Yeah, and yeah, we learned some interesting things, some nuance about how Athens and Sparta was. Sparta was not that dictatorial. They were a hybrid regime, and then Athens, they were not as good as we see them. There were a lot of bad things with Athens, although they were better than most Greek city-states at the time. Okay, then moving on to horror, of course. I haven't read that much horror books, mostly by Stephen King. But here, my favorite horror book is also my favorite book overall. And I've read about, 250 books for so far in the last few years. And my favorite book of all time so far is The Shining by Stephen King. Now, I'm sure most of you have probably seen The Shining movie. Good movie, but the book is better. And yeah, it's a perfect book. That's what I can say. There's not a... Stephen King writes too much sometimes, but I don't think there's a single word I would remove from this book. It's perfect. Right with the first sentence, when I started reading this book, I was like, this is just amazing. And it's not that scary. There's one scary scene, the purple lady in the bathtub, that's in the middle of the book, but it's just a fun, riveting read, and you understand you get to see how it is to be a recovering alcoholic in this book. So yeah, with Stephen King, yeah, it's not that short of a book, but it's my favorite book overall, The Shining. Just because it's an interesting environment, living in a hotel alone while it's snowing. If you wanna read about how cabin fever can screw up someone really badly, then you should read The Shining. Even though it's fiction. Okay, then I have a category here called literary fiction. So I'll keep a lot of statistics about what the books I read, and I have a statistic called literary fiction. I have a category called literary fiction, so a lot of the George Orwell stuff I've read I've placed in here. But here, my favorite literary fiction book is Disgrace by, what's he called, Krotze, or I've got it here actually in my, I can pull it up, Krotze. Wait, give me a few seconds, because I've got, what's that book, what's the author's name? Oh yeah, let's see. Disgraced by Jem E. Coates. So this is a weird book. So it's about... So the book starts out with a... So the book starts... The book starts out with the professor-student relationship, and this is taking place in South Africa, if I remember correctly. And then you also see there's also a girl later on in this book, I think the daughter of the main character, who gets raped. And this is the best tragedy I've ever read, where you basically see the woman who the girl is she's basically destroyed by being raped. Her father is also distraught by what's happened, that this has happened, and he wants to get her out of this environment, but she ends up kind of, I think she ends up towards the end maybe marrying a rapist, if I remember correctly. So this is really a heart-wrenching tragedy, Disgrace by J.M.E. Kotze. And it's great literary fiction. Next category is memoir, and here I have On Writing by Stephen King. So I haven't read a lot of memoirs. The memoirs I've usually read are by George Orwell. I've read his 3 memoirs, but here my favorite memoir is On Writing by Stephen King, because here I get to learn about the life of Stephen King. That's interesting, and there's also a lot of good writing advice. So great memoir and writing advice book On Writing by Stephen King. Yeah, and you also the fun thing with this book is here you get his thought process where he wrote some of his famous books. So you learn about the story of him writing Carrie, and why he doesn't plot books usually. And I think there was an exception with The Stand. So yeah, and you also learn about his alcoholism and his drug use, and then when there was the intervention and he stopped doing drugs. And you also learn about the car accident he had in around 2000 or so. So yeah, good memoir, great memoir. Then for philosophy here, yeah, I have a category where I've read philosophy. And yeah, I've read some classical philosophy about Machiavelli and yes, and Sun Tzu and the Magna Carta and the US and the Federalist Papers. Those are philosophy things I've read, but the book here on philosophy I actually picked, and it's not really a philosophy book you would call it, but I'm gonna class that this is my channel, I do. Here we have it's called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, and also his daughter and his son-in-law. He's also wrote it. And it's published after he died, Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling was a great Swedish statistician, or great Swedish intellectual, and he's actually the guy who clearly showed, okay, the world has improved a lot. That's what factfulness is about. So it shows, okay, absolute poverty has fallen down very quickly. We have a lot less people die now each year proportionately. Living standards have gone up really quickly. It talks about the 4 levels of living standards. Where level 1, you're on the brink of death. Level 2, you're not really good, but you're not on the brink of death, but it's easy to fall back in level 1. Then you have level 3, which is where a lot of people are in mid development. So I would say some workers in the West are at this level, and then a lot of people in the developing world are here. And then you have the level 4, which is where most of the middle class, which is where the middle class is in the West, their standard of living, and also where the upper classes are around the world. And yeah, it's a great books about different statistics. And if you've ever thought that I'm an optimist on this channel when I talk about different stuff, this is why Factfulness. This book opened my eyes, basically, that the world is not going to hell. It's not getting worse. It's getting better in the long run. And this is one of the reasons I think so, because I read Factfulness by Hans Rosling. So if you're a pessimist, you should read this book and give it a chance and see if you change your mind. Let's see, Williams Library. I'm thinking about adding a romance novel to my wish list and then lament over my unremarkable life. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Valentine's Day is coming up in a few days, and I guess a few people who like reading books are just gonna read books instead of think about love on that day. Yeah, I'm not reading a romance book, no way. Ken Follett's romance was bad enough for me. I don't need to read romance books. Yeah, sorry. Then we can move on to the category of political science. And I read some political science. Actually, and here I'm gonna talk about the first book I actually read, which got me back into reading. I started reading seriously again in December of 2018. Since then, I've read quasi constantly. I mean, every week I've been reading at least somewhat. And yeah, And this book is Dictator's Handbook. Let's see, the authors have a couple of weird names. Dictator's Handbook by Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alistair Smith. And the subtitle of this book is Why Bad Behavior is Almost Always Good Politics. Hymns are beautiful. Perhaps it's time you find yourself a wife. Let's see. I'm not sure if you're addressing me or Williams Library. So, yeah. Let's see. But Dictator's Handbook, if you've ever thought why I'm a bit blasé about dictators, why I tolerate some dictators around the world, why I accept that they exist as a necessary evil, Dictator's Handbook is why, because this is why you think about power politics here. So basically, as a dictator, hymns are beautiful, yeah, well, I'm 19, so I'm a bit young for getting a wife. Hymns are beautiful, you're up and coming young men. Oh yeah, well, after the test, which is actually on Valentine's Day on Tuesday, I'm gonna go to some social events, so we'll see what happens then. So who knows, maybe I can get... There's some weird speed dating thing happening on Tuesday evening, so I'm gonna go to that. We'll see how it goes. But with Dictator's Handbook, here you understand why dictators are brutal and why they are. Basically, if you're not brutal as a dictator, someone's gonna kill you and replace you. So this is why I don't hate Lee Kuan Yew. Why I can appreciate what Chiang Kai-shek has done, and I really dislike communists, sure. But I understand the thought process of why communist states are so brutal. Because to stay in power, you have to be brutal, and that's why communism cannot work. You have to have a dictator. And this book also makes you think about, okay, this is how you can transition to democracies, and how foreign aid actually helps sustain dictatorships. So unless you have a very well thought out plan of how you're issuing foreign aid, dictatorships are just gonna take advantage of that. So, okay, Pakistan is not really a dictatorship, but for example, the USA gives them money to deal with the Taliban, and the incentive there is basically, okay, but if we eradicate the Taliban, they're gonna stop giving us money, so we're gonna keep the Taliban around. So if you really want to understand power politics, this is my favorite non-fiction book, although I've only read it once. You should read Dictator's Handbook. It's an amazing book. I don't agree with it completely. I actually wrote an online essay on it on my Google Drive a couple years back. So I don't know if any of you are interested, but sometime I could make a video about this book, because it's really good, and I could just read out the essay I wrote about it. And I wrote an essay of 10-20 pages on this book. Okay, next category here is science fiction, and here most of the science fiction I've read is Michael Crichton, so a decent amount of amount of science fiction I've read. And here I'm gonna go with Sphere by Michael Crichton, maybe my second favorite book behind The Shining. Williams Library, I'm center left, but I hate it when people call me a communist as a smear. Oh yeah, well, Williams Library, so far I haven't gotten the impression really that you're a socialist or a communist. I mean, when the video you did on Mao's book, it indicates that you're not really a communist. So, but yeah, I can understand why you hate it. It's a smear to being called a communist. Like, so far on this channel, I haven't been called a Nazi or a fascist yet. But it's gonna happen sometime. Someday there's gonna be someone on the left who gets triggered from one of my videos and who's gonna call me a fascist and Nazi. But we have to power through it, deal with it. I understand it's unpleasant to being called names, being called fascist, communist. Although there are a lot of people on the left who are quasi-communist, but you're not one of them, really. And also, communist also usually implies that you're in favor of a dictatorship. Like, if you're a socialist, but if you're a socialist, but you want socialism in a democracy, although I don't think that's possible, you're not really a communist then. But speaking of science fiction, Sphere. So with Sphere, first. with the Sphere is a book taking place in the Deep Blue Sea by Michael Crichton. And apart from the first 20-30 pages or so, it's a perfect book. Yeah, it's very fast paced, a great thriller, great sci-fi. You get a giant squid showdown in the middle of the book. Most of the crew is killed off here. Williams Library, thank you for your understanding. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can understand you. I mean, you and me, Williams Library. You've been on this channel a while, and I discovered your channel half a year ago, and yeah, we can see that we're good people. Yeah, but science fiction sphere, my favorite sci-fi book. So if you want to read something science fiction, if you want to read something by Michael Crichton, by the way, my second favorite author, I think, behind Territory Love, you should check out Sphere. I know that Jurassic Park is an amazing novel. I know. Sphere is a better novel in my opinion. And if you like the Deep Blue Sea, reading about sea books, ocean books, then you should definitely read Sphere. Okay, next category is thrillers, and I barely read any thrillers, but here I go anyways with thrillers. Billy Summers by Stephen King. A quite recent book. I got it for Little Christmas in 2021, which is a Finnish tradition, by the way, in early December. So that was a great gift. Thanks, Dad. And that's a Stephen King. That's a Stephen King book about an assassin who's gonna do his last job, and you have some mobsters in this book, kind of. But you have a secret plot involving a billionaire pedophile. So yeah, it's a great story. There are some parts of this book I don't like really, but most of it is great or amazing. You have good characters. I like Billy Summers. There's actually a girl in this book. You meet her midway through or so. She's a girl who gets raped. And then there's a side plot in this book about the main character getting vengeance for her, and you get a kind of father-daughter relationship forming between them. Massimo Pirasi, you're most welcome, William. Yeah, thanks, Dad. My parents get me some great books sometimes. Or maybe more than sometimes, actually. So yeah, Billy Summers, a good thriller, a great thriller. Although a kind of small annoying thing with this book, is that he name drops Trump in a derogatory way. So I understand people don't like Trump, but yeah, I don't like it. It's a weird. He talks about Trump in a irritating way in this book, and he's portraying Republicans as bastards in this book also. Okay, and now let's move on to the last category, true crime. So in my early reading days, in 2019 and early 2020, I actually read a bunch of true crime. So what is true crime? That's reading about crime in real life. I didn't include the crime category here because the only crime book I basically read is The Godfather. But I read a few mafia books of true crime about the American mafia, the history of the mafia in Sicily, in New York, that I found that interesting originally. Now I'm kind of off that, but my favorite true crime book is actually Narconomics. And this was I also got this book for Christmas a few years back by my dad. I got this for, what was it? Christmas 2019, I believe. Yeah, Christmas 2019, I got this book. And it was also the first book I read in 2020. And this is a book about the economics of the drug trade. And it's by Narconomics by Tom Wainwright. And the subtitle here is How to Run a Cartel, a kind of tongue-in-cheek. And it's a book written by some guy working at The Economist. And this talks about where drugs are produced. So cocaine, for example, that's mainly grown in Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. And and the conclusion of this book is kind of, okay, drugs should probably be decriminalized. What are some of the experiments different countries have done with drug laws? How has drug legalization gone along? So what has happened with weed legalization? And also then you have the chain of cocaine. So the first part of the cocaine process, then the cocaine is not worth that much. So first it's maybe worth a kilo of cocaine is maybe worth a few dozen dollars now, but in the end of the processing it's worth thousands of dollars. So yeah, if you want to learn about, if you want to read about the economics of the drug war, the drug trade, you should read Economics by Tom Wainwright. Yeah, good book. Although I read it a while ago, so don't remember that much about it, but I remember enjoying that book, so yeah. And those are the things I brought here on this iPad, the topics I was gonna talk about. So I don't have anything left to talk about. So if you have any more questions now, you can ask them, but I'm probably going to end the live stream quite soon because yeah, the table of contents I've made, I'm done with that now for the live stream. But thank you guys again for 300 subscribers. This has been a good last couple of weeks for me. I've had fun. So now I have my driver's license. Now I have and now I have 300 subscribers. Unfortunately, I failed the medieval ages test, but hopefully I'll pass it on Tuesday. So yeah, hymns are beautiful. What are you doing today? Not anything special. I'm probably gonna do hymns are beautiful doing for the rest of the day. So let's see. I'm probably gonna read a bit. I've been kind of a reading slump, relatively for me. So, but I haven't read that much in the last few days. But I may read some tonight since I watched a movie yesterday, and I watch one movie a week usually on Fridays. So today I'll maybe read in the evening. And by the way, yesterday I watched Equilibrium with Christopher Bale. That was a decent dystopian movie. Although although the violence and gunplay in that movie is a bit ridiculous, but it's fun. But yeah, after this live stream, Williams Library. Nice talking to you. Excuse me as I exit. Okay, goodbye, Williams Library. Hopefully we'll talk to each other soon again on some live stream or something like that. By the way, I think that the next live stream I'm gonna do is probably gonna be in March, actually. Sometime in mid-March. My father, I hope to finish my book on silver this weekend. Oh yeah, man, my father's reading a book on the history of silver. And yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of interesting books about different materials you can read about. But let's see, so tonight, after this live stream, I'm gonna eat immediately. So I've got a bucket full of chicken wings I'm gonna eat. And I'm done with 1983 now. So now I actually started watching a K-drama series. So I like K-pop, so I like Korean stuff, Korean media. So now I'm trying to see if I like Korean TV shows. So I'm probably gonna watch that while I eat. But yeah, otherwise I'm gonna read a bit. I'm also gonna go on my evening walk. If I'm lucky, I get to see the cat again this evening. Hopefully, but probably not. I'm see the cat every few weeks or so. But yeah, if there aren't any more questions, I'm gonna close the stream very soon. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Any more comments? I'm gonna give it a minute or so, and then I'm gonna close the live stream if there aren't any more questions. My father, very interesting. The Story of Silver by William L. Silver. Oh yeah, that. And I wonder, the Story of Silver, is it about the story of silver in the United States specifically, or about silver in the world in general? Because if it's about silver in the world in general, I know that silver was very important to the Athenian economy. So does it talk about that at all, I wonder? Great live stream, William. Okay, thanks, Dad. Okay, so yeah, thanks everyone for joining the live stream. We even went on longer than last time. I thought this was maybe not gonna be long, but now I've been talking for almost 2 hours and 10 minutes. So last time it was 1:55, now it's 2 hours and 10. So unless there are any more questions, I'm gonna cut the live stream now. So Let's see. Give it 30 seconds. My father, mostly US, but also much international discussion. Yeah, and okay, yeah, okay. So unless there are any, oh yeah, my father, including China and Saudi Arabia. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. History of silver. So unless there are any final questions, I'm gonna close the live stream now. Thank you for joining me for this live stream. I had a lot of fun. I'm gonna live stream again sometime in mid-March probably. So you can expect another live stream, I guess, in 4 or 5 weeks. I had a lot of fun doing this. I'm gonna think of something else to talk about for next live stream. Thanks everyone for showing up. Again, thank you for 300 subscribers. Let's see when we can get to 400. Anyways, I'm the Avid Reader, and I will see you readers soon, next time. Goodbye, readers. My father, thanks. Wish you a nice evening. Everyone also have a nice evening. Goodbye, readers.